My name is Savannah Brooks, I'm 28 years old, and the night my father threw my life out onto the front lawn, I had just come off a 12-hour shift at an emergency animal hospital trying to keep a burned Labrador alive. I still smelled like antiseptic and wet fur when I pulled into the driveway and saw my duffel bag ripped open in the grass, my scrubs tangled around a broken lamp, my winter coat half buried in the flower bed, and a box of childhood photos dumped upside down like trash. My father stood there under the porch light with his phone raised, actually recording me, while my mother stood behind him with her arms folded and my younger sister Tessa smirked like this was some kind of show. Then my father shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "You're 28, Savannah. You suck us dry like a damn vampire. I want you gone tonight." Tessa even nudged one of my bins with her sneaker and sent my framed certificates sliding into the street. I should have cried. I should have begged. But instead, something in me just went cold. I loaded every last thing into my car without giving them the breakdown they wanted, then walked up to all three of them and quietly said, "Hope you all sleep good tonight, because one day none of you are going to sleep at all." I didn't go to a friend's house after that. I drove 3 exits south, parked behind a 24-hour gas station, and found a voice memo that had accidentally recorded the whole thing. My father yelling, my sister laughing, my mother saying, "Just let her go, Richard. She brought this on herself." I listened to it 3 times because I knew exactly how families like mine worked. By morning, they'd call it a misunderstanding. By next week, they'd say I was dramatic. By Christmas, they'd tell everyone I stormed out over nothing. So I saved the audio, made a folder on my phone, and named it When They Start Lying. That first night I stayed in a cheap motel with flickering bathroom lights, 2 vending machine granola bars, and 1 hard rule, I was never going back. Around 1:30 a.m., my phone started blowing up. My father demanded to know where I was. My mother said I was acting unstable. My sister texted, "Ugh, have fun paying for your own everything." I didn't answer any of them. I just took screenshots and added them to the folder, because when people humiliate you in public, proof becomes armor. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted to tell me the truth without softening it. Noah Carter, a paramedic I'd met 2 years earlier when he brought a seizing beagle into the ER at 3 in the morning. He didn't start with pity. He just said, "Tell me exactly what happened." No protecting them. So for the first time in my life, I told the story without trying to make my family sound better. When I finished, he asked me one question. "If they called you tonight crying, would you go back?" I stared at the motel curtain and answered faster than I expected. "No." Noah nodded once and said, "Good. Then stop treating this like a breakup you might fix. This is a fire you finally walked out of." That line hit hard because he was right. I hadn't been kicked out of a loving home. I had escaped a system built on shame. And the ugliest truth was this. My father hadn't thrown me out because I was useless. He'd thrown me out because I had stopped being useful in the exact way he liked. I was the one paying half the groceries, tracking my mother's meds, ordering the dog's prescriptions, handling deliveries, bills, and all the invisible little tasks that kept that house running while they still called me a burden. I wasn't freeloading. I was unpaid infrastructure. By day 3, I had exactly $341 left after gas, food, motel costs, and storage. But somehow I also felt clearer than I had in years. No one was slamming cabinets because I got home late. No one was keeping score of what I used. At work, I moved on instinct, steady hands, calm under pressure, useful in a way that actually meant something. That's when my supervisor, Dr. Elaine Mercer, pulled me aside and said, "Savannah, you're already doing the work of someone who should be in our advanced surgical track. Why haven't you applied?" I almost laughed. Because how do you explain that you've spent years in a house where ambition gets treated like betrayal? So I just said, "Bad timing." And she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then maybe it's finally good timing." That same afternoon, Noah met me at a diner and slid a yellow legal pad across the table. On it he'd written 3 words, housing, certification, boundaries. Then he said, "These are your only priorities right now. Not defending yourself. Not explaining yourself. Not chasing closure." Then he asked me, "If your father calls crying, your mother says she's sick with worry, And your sister says the family is falling apart. What do you do? I looked down at the pad and said, I let it fall apart. And for the first time in my life, saying that didn't feel cruel. It felt like survival. By the end of that week, I had rented a tiny garage apartment from a widow named Mrs. Delaney, moved in with 2 duffel bags, a folding chair, and a second-hand mattress, and changed my emergency contact from my mother to Noah. One small tap on my phone that somehow felt like cutting the last wire tying me back to that house. The apartment smelled like sawdust and old paint, and it was perfect because it was quiet. Real quiet, not the fake kind that hangs over a toxic home right before somebody explodes. That's when the messages from my family started changing. My father stopped calling me lazy and started asking where the car title paperwork was. My mother wanted to know if I'd moved anything important. Tessa texted, "Do you still have the utility portal login?" No one asked if I was safe. No one apologized. They didn't miss me. They missed my labor. My absence hadn't created grief in that house. It had created work. Days 6 through 10 were when everything really started to unravel. Mrs. Delaney turned out to know half the subdivision where I grew up, and every day some new piece of truth seemed to find its way back to her. One morning she knocked on my door and said, "Honey, your daddy was shouting in the driveway loud enough for 3 houses," then added, "Men only get that loud when the audience they wanted didn't clap." Noah called after a transport near my old block and casually mentioned my father was outside arguing with a cable guy because nobody could get into the account anymore. My mother left a voicemail crying 1 minute and accusing me the next, saying I was embarrassing the family and turning my father into someone she barely recognized, which almost made me laugh because Richard Brooks had always been exactly who he was. The only difference now was that his favorite target had left. Then on day 9, an old co-worker texted me saying my father had shown that lawn video to someone at work, and it had completely backfired because people thought it made him look cruel. So that was it. He hadn't just wanted me gone, he wanted applause. That same night my phone blew up again, but the one message that stood out was from Tessa, "He can't sleep." I stared at that sentence and remembered how calm my father had looked under the porch light when he told me to get out. How sure he'd been that consequences belonged to somebody else. But shame has a funny way of circling back. The next afternoon, Dr. Mercer told me my certification application had been accepted and the hospital was willing to sponsor most of the cost if I committed to the surgical track. The same week my father was losing his mind because I wasn't there to keep his house running. I was stepping into the career he'd always implied I wasn't serious enough to deserve. 10 days after he threw my life into the yard, he finally called while I was sitting in the hospital break room, and before I answered, I hit record. He didn't start with hello. He started with blame. Mom was stressed, Tessa was impossible, the neighbors were talking, bills were getting missed, and I was selfish for disappearing when the family was already under pressure. I let him rant until he said the one thing that told me everything: "If you don't come home and help settle this, I'll make sure everybody knows what kind of daughter you are." I leaned back in my chair and smiled because there it was. No concern, no remorse, no apology, just blackmail dressed up like family values. So I said, "You mean tell people you threw your daughter's belongings onto the lawn while filming it?" Silence. Then I added, "Go ahead, Dad." He got meaner and said, "You think you're tough now because people are filling your head?" And I answered, "No. I think I'm tough now because I'm hearing my own thoughts for the first time." Then I cut him off with the line that ended whatever power he thought he still had, and just so we're clear, I recorded this call too. He hung up instantly. That evening, Dr. Mercer officially offered me the sponsored surgical track and a raise, and when I got back to the apartment, Mrs. Delaney told me my father had shown up there too, but she hadn't let him in. 2 days later, he came back while I was home. I opened the door with the chain still on and found him standing there looking worse than I'd ever seen him. Not sorry, not broken, just frayed and furious. He said, "We need to talk." I said, "We're talking now." He looked past me into my tiny apartment and started trying every version of the same manipulation. "Your mother's a wreck, your sister cries every day." I was angry, I didn't mean it like that, until finally he said the one sentence that proved he still didn't get it: "You're making me look like a monster." I laughed right in his face and said, "I'm not making you look like anything. You did that yourself." Then when he snapped, after everything we've done for you, I finally gave him the truth he had spent years avoiding. You mean after everything I did for you? Who managed Mom's meds? Who paid half the groceries? Who handled the bills, the dog, the errands, the deliveries? Who kept that house running while you called me useless? He had no answer because there wasn't one. Then he said, low and bitter, families don't survive daughters like you. And I looked him dead in the eyes and said, no, families like ours don't survive once daughters like me stop lying for them. That one hit him. Then he tried one last move and said, if you walk away from your family like this, don't expect us to be there when you need us. But by then I was done being scared of losing something I'd never really had, so I just smiled and said, that's okay. You never really were. Then I closed the door. Not hard. Not dramatic. Just closed it. And that was the revenge. Not screaming back. Not ruining him. Not exposing him online. Just becoming unreachable to the people who only knew how to love me when I was useful, guilty, and available. The daughter they called a parasite turned out to be the one thing keeping that entire household standing, and once I left, they didn't just miss me, they collapsed around the shape of me. I didn't have to destroy them. I just stopped saving them.